Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Learning Engineering Podcast. I'm Dr. Scotty Craig, your host for the podcast. And today I'm joined by my co-host, Seun Lee.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm your co-host, Mei. I go by Mei here. I'm a PhD candidate in human system engineering, working with Scotty at Arizona State University. And currently, I am working as a design intern at the University Design Institute at ASU.
Okay, and today we are joined by Jim Goodell as our guest, and I'm very excited to have him here as one of the leading thought members of the ICICLE group and for learning engineering. So I'm so excited to talk to him today. And I will actually, Jim, if you'd like to kind of quickly introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Jim Goodell. I work for Quality Information Partners, and I'm the editor and co-author of the Learning Engineering Toolkit.
Yes, which is a wonderful book. I highly recommend it. Everybody go read it right now. And we will actually put a link to it along with this podcast, just so everybody has easy access to it. And Jim, thank you so much for joining us today. I think we're going to have a wonderful conversation. I'm very excited. Now, I wonder if we could start out by just kind of briefly focusing on kind of your training and expertise as it relates to coming into learning engineering.
Yes. Well, I don't have a credential that calls me a learning engineer. A lot of what I know in the many domains that make up learning engineering have been self-taught or through experiences rather than formal credentials. And I can get into a long story of how I came to that, but I'll leave it there for now.
Okay. Okay, thank you. And I think that's actually pretty common, and that a lot of us don't have formal credentials in learning engineering. Now, I want to get back to that comment you just said, because I want to know more about that journey. So could you tell, how did you get here?
Sure, let's go way back. My very first job when I was an undergrad, for one summer, I worked for Digital Equipment Corporation in their Educational Services Division, developing computer-based courseware. And if I look at it kind of through the way back lens, we sort of were doing a form of learning engineering, low fidelity form, but we were considering some of the learning sciences. We were considering research of where people first looked on a text-based screen, and we were doing iterative development. We did some user testing. I don't think we did a great job at that time. And we were perhaps applying some aspects of engineering and user-centered design. We were using some data-informed decision-making, but not much. So all of the elements that make up learning engineering, just barely scratching the surface way back then. And then fast forward to a job that I had in the early 2000s with the Center for Education Leadership and Technology, where I was leading a team developing school improvement software. And we were using some of the aspects of learning engineering that are featured in the book, like agile development methodologies. And I think what really turned me on to in the direction of learning engineering was a mentor, a Dr. Otis Stanley, who was the director of school improvement at Detroit Public Schools, pointed me to learning sciences authors like researcher Robert Marzano, and about formative assessment. And I started reading about the learning sciences and discoveries about how the brain works, and just really intrigued by that. And then fast forward again to 2018, and I heard about this group. I'd been working with QIP, supporting the Common Education Data Standards with the U.S. Department of Education, and supporting work with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation. But there was this group connected with IEEE. IEEE is the largest technical professional standards organization in the world. That is the standards organization behind standards that we've all heard about, Bluetooth and Wi-Fi. And they were starting this group called ICICLE. And ICICLE was the IC Consortium on Learning Engineering. Now, I was intrigued by that. I had gone to an engineering university as an undergrad, Worcester Polytechnic Institution. So I kind of was familiar with some mindsets of engineering. And I was really intrigued about learning. So I wanted to join this organization. And when I first joined in 2018, the organization had just started, and I attended some special interest groups. And, most of the conversations were about trying to figure out what is this thing called learning engineering, and no one could exactly agree on a definition. And at the time, Ken Katinger and Mark Lee were leading a curriculum special interest group, and they were having debates there. And Janet Kolodner was leading a design special interest group, and the debates were happening there. And I thought to myself, I'd really like to help answer that question. So I took a few days off, a few vacation days, and used some frequent flyer miles. I flew to Pittsburgh because the term learning engineering was coined by Herb Simon, a Nobel laureate, over 50 years ago. And I figured that was kind of the roots of learning engineering. I should go there and figure this out. So Mark Lee and I interviewed Ken Katinger and a bunch of other people at Carnegie Mellon University and folks at Duolingo and a bunch of other spin-off companies that were producing learning solutions. And we started to get an idea of what learning engineering might be, and we brought that back. And then Ken's curriculum SIG and Michael J's learning engineering competency SIG kind of merged, and I became a co-lead of that. And we took a working definition that Janet and Ken and Mark had been working on and came up with what is now the official definition of learning engineering. And that is, learning engineering is a process and a practice that applies the learning sciences using human-centered engineering design methodologies and data-informed decision-making to support learners in their development. And that helped kind of bring the community together, having that definition. And that was really the beginning of bringing together the authors for the book, The Learning Engineering Toolkit, as well.
That's great. And I mean, all of that was actually extremely impressive. Now, Jim, you've obviously worked on a lot of different types of learning engineering projects and related projects over the years. Would you like to tell our audience in more detail about any of them?
I think what's on my mind most recently is how we communicate the key messages of learning engineering. And so the book project was sort of a learning engineering project, although it's kind of a static resource, and I'm sure we will revise it and iterate on it, but it's not as much iteration as in the ideal learning engineering process. But we've been doing a lot of presenting to different audiences on what is learning engineering and how do you start to apply it in your context. And I think that's probably itself a good example of a learning engineering project. And I don't like using the word project in this context because project implies a fixed start and end. And learning engineering is more of a process. So I was on a podcast earlier this week, or a webinar earlier this week, and one of the questions was about procurement of learning solutions. And there really needs to be a mindset change from this idea of developing, say, an e-learning course, and you take the content and you put it into an e-learning format and you finish it and then you're done. Well, that's not how learning engineering works. Learning engineering assumes multiple iterations and assumes that we're going to use data to inform the next iteration.
Yeah, I think that's actually an important, issue. Like I asked about projects, but it's really learning engineering is that process.
Hi, Jim. The example you just gave us about the course, like e-learning courses, just not a one-time thing you set up. You design a course and put it online, and then that's just going to be in. It reminds me of this conversation that I had with Stuart, actually. Stuart is another classmate, also colleagues within the HSC, Human System Engineering, our classes. So we have this conversation about how the course should be. It's like, make a analogy. It's like when you buy iPhone, and then when you got to update it to a next iPhone 14, let's say you have an iPhone 6, you can trade in your iPhone to get a discount on the latest model. But for the courses, a student take a courses like maybe 2 semesters ago, and then when they find out now there's a better courses that relied on that's really related to that courses, they wish they never take that courses before, because now they have to pay extra money to get those courses again. But they just like, if there's some system for I don't know for higher education system they were going to do that, but if online have that type of deal, like if you take this courses and then you want to trade in with this new information, you got a discount or something like that, that'll be awesome. I just like threw that up.
Right. Yeah. And we're the world is changing. Packaging semester-long courses is not the future. The future is more micro-learning, more learning on the corporate training side. It's learning in the flow of work rather than pausing work and going and doing something else. And I think I see a trend towards more certifications in higher ed that are chunked in smaller sizes, and less emphasis on not that degrees will ever go away, but especially for certain professions, certifications. And higher ed institutions do a great job of retaining their customers as alumni to receive to try to get donations, but we're in a world where everyone needs to be a lifelong learner, and I think universities can be doing a better job of nurturing that lifelong learning experience in ways that maybe not as expensive as the initial degree, because you can't put the same level of college loans on top of the original while you're paying off the initial ones, right?
Yes.
So, food for thought. But I've digressed and got off your question about projects. So, kind of back to projects. I see the process of learning engineering. I see the presentations that, for example, at last year's ICICLE conference, Dr. Seyschatz and I presented a tutorial on learning engineering, and it was the best tutorial. And Say and I have done this variations of this presentation multiple times, and I've done this a variation of the presentation with other people and combined with other material. And in general, it's iteratively getting better because we're getting feedback. But when we take the presentation to a different audience, we sometimes get surprises with the data that we're collecting, like the feedback, the surveys that people answer after a session at a conference. And there was a conference that we went to last year, and we did a presentation, and we knew it was a less technical audience. So we thought we took out the more technical parts and made it more approachable. But the feedback that we got told us very much differently, that they thought it was too technical. And so now we have future opportunities to present to the same conference, and we're going to be able to adjust the presentation to fit our new knowledge of what that audience needs to hear.
Yeah, and that's one thing with presentations. It is always difficult, like to get that technical level right.
That's right. Yeah, the conference is not the best form of learning. It has its place. It's the expository learning that is exposure to new concepts, and that's valuable. But once we get beyond that, other modalities are going to work better.
Yes, I agree. So throughout your career, you have done a lot. You've done a lot in shaping the learning engineering area. You've done a lot of learning engineering-based projects. So this may be difficult for you, but can you think of maybe 2 or 3 lessons learned? So that would be useful for somebody who's just coming into the area or is just starting to do learning engineering projects.
I would say, as someone just coming into the area, don't be intimidated by the more technical parts, because learning engineering is a team sport, and you don't have to learn every part of learning engineering. What's more important is that the team has the right kinds of expertise to solve the problem, and that there is a shared understanding among the team members. And that's really important, because the different domains that are needed for learning engineering, sometimes it's computer science, and almost always data science, and someone with content knowledge and pedagogy, and sometimes it's about engineering the environment, or motivation and behavioral economics. So all of these areas, and some of these domains, use the same words to mean different things. So it's important that there's some cross-training among team members. And then also, don't be intimidated to learn new things. Part of our work on the Learning Engineering Toolkit, I needed to learn a little bit more about what was out there in terms of learning analytics. So I visited Dr. Ryan Baker's website with his massive open online textbook on big data and education. And I realized, even as old as I am, old dogs can learn new tricks. And I learned some things about learning analytics. And that I'm so glad that I did that, even though it was difficult at first.
Yeah, and I think that's such an important point with, like, you have to approach learning engineering. Again, it is a process and it is a team. I love the idea of, like, learning engineering is a team sport. You're working with a lot of people. I've been asking a lot of questions and kind of guiding this, but I want to kind of turn it over to you for a bit. Is there anything else that you would like to kind of add that we haven't touched on that you think would be useful for our audience to hear, or anything you might want to promote, anything like that?
So this will probably be aired after the Learning Engineering Conference that's in 2 weeks. But I would recommend that whenever you hear it, to go to ICICLE.org and get involved in the ICICLE community and attend the next ICICLE conference. There's also a Learning Engineering Google group that is supported by Schmidt Futures and the Learning Agency, and that gets into some more of the research oriented aspects of learning engineering. Let's see, what else? I guess I'm going to go back to the definition to think about if there's something that we haven't covered. Learning engineering is a process and a practice that applies the learning sciences using human-centered engineering design methodologies and data-informed decision-making to support learners in their development. And so one thing that comes to mind is that data-informed decision-making is really two parts. One is getting the data, and a fancy name for that is instrumentation. And ideally, as more learning experiences are moving online, there's an opportunity to use sensors. And sensors can just be a touchscreen or a keyboard or a mouse, but it also can be things like in experiential learning settings, it could be eye tracking or VR, AR headsets, those kinds of things. But using that experience data, and there are some great standards from IEEE, experience API standards that that are being adopted across platforms. That gives you information that you just couldn't have before when you were looking at things like just data from surveys or grades. Having the actual learner interactions just opens the door to the kind of feedback that can really optimize learning experiences.
Yes, thank you for that. And thank you for joining us today, Jim. It's been a wonderful conversation. I think that our audience have learned a lot from it, and I hope they've enjoyed it as much as I have. But I also want to end by telling everybody, if you have not read the Learning Engineering Toolkit, I highly recommend it, or any of Jim's other recent publications also. And we will link some of these again in the show notes. Such as, you have the journal article, actually, that was just published in the Journal of Military Learning with you and Say that you just published. So based off of that, the talks that you've been giving. It's Learning Engineering at a Glance, I believe is the name of it. It was another great summary, succinct summary of what learning engineering is. I often give it to people when they ask me, it's like, well, can you give me like a short summary of what learning engineering is? And I'm like, here's a paper. It's been very useful.
There's a great infographic attached to that paper as well.
It is. So that's a really great primer for learning engineering. I wanted to thank you for actually writing that. And since it actually went to my special issue that I was organizing, thank you for a wonderful contribution for that. And again, thank you so much for joining us today, Jim. I would like to also thank Mei, my co-host, for helping out in this session, and also for you, our listeners. Thank you for joining us. I hope you found this as fun and entertaining as I have. And we'll see you next time on the next Learning Engineering podcast.